Welcome to another great episode of Royal Black and Elite, where we teach Black history from another side, the royal side. I'm Lady Trinette Wilson, your lecturer and social historian. And today we're going to go to Africa and meet an African princess who went from the palace to a pit, back to the palace again. Our first African princess, Sara Forbes Bonetta Davies. Born Omoba Ina in 1843, she was known as Princess Ina of the Yoruba people in Nigeria, West Africa. The Yoruba are one of the three largest ethnic groups in Nigeria. They're concentrated in the southwestern part of that country, but they do also have some people scattered in like Benin and northern Togo. It's around 20 million people strong. But before it became what we know today as Yoruba, back then they were a farming people. They grew yams and corn and peanuts and plantains, but they were also known for being great craftsmen as well. So they did things like leather work and weaving and glass making. So they were known for that. Unfortunately, they were under the thumb of the Oyi Empire, where the Dahomey tribe was a part of that Oyi Empire, and they often raided neighboring tribes in order to participate in the slave trade. Today, constituting for about 47 million people, the Yoruba were already very much so advanced in urban centers, and they were organized around powerful cities and towns in the residence of the Oba or the king, and that's why her name is Omoba. So the when you were a king or a queen, the Omoba Ina, Omoba was the sign that you come from a royal background. Now, it doesn't tell us how many siblings she had, but we do know that she was a princess and she was a royal because of that name, Omoba Ina. The Dahomey were under the foot of the Oi tribe, and so they were made to enslave other villagers, other Africans. So, unfortunately, they often performed slave raids on other tribes. The Dahomey were a fierce bunch. Now, they perhaps were known best for the Dahomey women warriors. We've seen that story in Black Panther, and in this this fall 2022, the movie Woman King is coming out based on the Dahomeyan women warriors. One of the reasons they had to fight is because they were fighting so much between the Yoruba and the different tribes that were around them to capture Africans to sell to the Europeans, because that's how the Oi built their kingdom. They were often enslaved themselves, and so that's how really Omoba was caught up in the slave trade. The Dahomey tribe conducted a slave raid on their village, and that's how Omoba was captured and enslaved by the Dahomey king Gazo. Now, not only was she facing her whole family being slaughtered, but this was very distressing for Omoba also because the Dahomeyans were very much into some brutal practices. And so they believed in doing some pretty brutal things, even to children. Child um, Giving children away. If you understand what I'm saying, you have to be careful of the YouTube algorithms. But they did things to children, and it ended up in them not living anymore. And so Omoba wanted out of there, and she was blessed because when she was the age of 5, a man named Frederick Forbes came to Nigeria, and he was there to talk to King Gazo. And King Gazo, who was the king at the time, he had no plans on stopping slavery because that's how they made their money. So when Forbes showed up, he was there on the behest of Queen Victoria. In 1843, 44, 48, during those years, the Europeans, in particular Britain, was moving away from the slave trade. And I say that's kind of convenient to now pass laws against the slave trade after Portugal, the Dutch, the Europeans, Brazil, the Muslims, Asia. Everyone had already benefited off of the slave trade, but now it's no longer allowed. And King Gazo really had no intention on stopping trading slaves. But he didn't want any trouble with the Queen, of course, or Britain. And so what he decided to do was to give Omoba as a gift to the Queen as a, show of faith that at some point they would stop slave trading. Well, this ended up being really great news actually for Omoba because even though she was still enslaved, by being able to now leave from the Dahomey tribe, she was now afforded a greater opportunity to be able to survive. Now, Forbes, there's no explanation, but Forbes didn't take her to Queen of Victoria right away. We don't know why, but at some point he did finally take her to meet the Queen. And immediately she made an impression. After all, she was a royal herself. So she knew how to speak the language. She knew how to carry herself well. She also knew a bit about music. The people who was on Forbes's boat with her noted that she was good in music. But not only that, her name was immediately changed. So no longer now do we know her as Omoba Ina. Her name was changed to Sara Forbes Bonetta. Now, the Forbes, after Mr. Forbes, but the other piece, the Bonetta, was named after his boat. So that's how she began to be known as Sara Forbes Bonetta. And when she met the Queen, immediately they fell in love with her. Now, the Queen called her Sally, and the crew affectionately called her Sally, even though Forbes had named her Sarah, and we all know her name was Omoba. So during that time, slaves often had to carry names that other people gave them. But nevertheless, the Queen loved her and she was good to her. Though Queen Victoria really cared for Sarah, the weather in Britain was really having a bad effect. So Sarah had to go back to Sierra Leone, where she attended Annie Wash Memorial School. And she did that up until the time she was 12 years old. That's when Queen Victoria requested that she return to England and began to go to school there and mature there. Once she returned back to England, she was truly thrust into her new social world. She became a young lady. She took etiquette classes. She learned how to carry herself. And all of that training really positioned her to be a socialite, an African princess in the country of England. That's when she met her husband, Captain James Pinson Lubulu Davies. He was a Yoruba businessman, very wealthy businessman. And so she truly ended up being the wife of someone who she had already been groomed to marry because she was a royal when in Africa. They went on to have three children, one of which had a descendant, Dr. Amio, who helped curb the spread of the Ebola virus in Africa. When they were married, it was a grand affair. In fact, they had 16 bridesmaids and 16 groomsmen. After getting married, they returned to Africa, however, because of her illness, because of traveling back from England to Africa. They really feel like it really had a bad effect on her breathing and her lungs. So as a result, they moved back to Africa, but the climate change still wasn't good for her. So in the end, she and her family eventually moved to the city of Francois, the capital of the Madeira Island. It was a Portuguese island along the Atlantic Ocean, where she continued to have health problems. Unfortunately, on August the 15th, 1880, at only 37 years old, the African princess died of tuberculosis. Sara Forbes Bonetta Davies was ripped from the safety of her royal family, but she still rose to prominence in the royal court. Her royal pedigree readied her to become the goddaughter to a queen and the wife of a millionaire. But most of all, she created an enduring legacy of royalty and victory. I hope you enjoyed today's teaching about Sara Forbes Bonetta Davies, Britain's first African princess and socialite. She is now buried. There's a memorial there, and you there in England. This is also a picture of her house. If you're ever in the area, so that you can go see it. As always, thank you for joining me for another great episode of Royal Black and Elite. Don't forget to hit the subscribe, share, and like button. See you in our next video.